A black woman was humiliated by the royal guard. Seconds later, she rode with the Queen. London does not announce itself. Other cities announce themselves. New York hits you in the chest before the plane lands. Tokyo reorganizes your sense of scale before you have left the airport. Paris insists on itself at every corner. But London simply is. It has been here for 1,000 years, and it has watched empires rise and dissolve, and it has the particular confidence of a city that knows it does not need to try. On a September evening, with the sky doing what September London skies do, holding a last, reluctant gold before the dark, Buckingham Palace is lit from below. The forecourt gleams. The railings are polished. The flags move in a light wind. The crowd behind the barriers on the Mall has been there for 2 hours, because the crowd is always there, because the palace draws people the way certain kinds of power always draw people. Not because it gives them anything, but because it represents something they want to be close to. Tonight is a state banquet. Inside the palace, the table is already set. 170 covers. Gold plate. Crystal. Flowers from the royal gardens. The kind of table that takes 3 days to arrange and exists for one evening and then is taken apart and put away again. Because the only thing more powerful than abundance is the ease with which it is assembled and dissolved. The guests are arriving. Heads of state. Senior ministers. Ambassadors. The people who hold, between them, the arrangements of the world. Who decide which borders hold and which ones shift, which agreements are signed and which ones quietly die, which phone calls get returned and which ones go unanswered. They arrive in official vehicles, in formal dress, with the specific bearing of people who are accustomed to rooms like this and have learned to wear that accustomedness as its own kind of authority. The red carpet runs from the gate to the entrance. The royal guard stands at the gate. And somewhere in the stream of arriving vehicles, a dark official car with diplomatic plates turns onto the forecourt. Inside it, a woman from Montgomery, Alabama, who has been inside this palace 3 times in 18 months and who is tonight about to have an experience that will be talked about for a very long time. Her name is Dr. Vivian Cole. She is the United States ambassador to the United Kingdom, and she has no idea what the next 15 minutes are going to require of her. Welcome to Golden Triumphant Stories. Here we share powerful stories of people who triumphed over difficult odds and came out strong and victorious. Please be part of us by clicking on the like and subscribe button right now. Before we go any further, you need to understand something about Vivian Cole. Not what she looked like to the royal guard standing at that gate. What she actually was. She was born in Montgomery, Alabama, in 1972, the daughter of Margaret Cole, who cleaned the floors of the Alabama State Capitol building for 26 years and raised her daughter in a house that was small and deliberate, where the books were many and the money was careful and the message was constant. You will go through every door. Not the side door. Not the back door. Every door. Margaret Cole had grown up in Montgomery during the civil rights movement. She had been a little girl when the buses stopped running on schedule and a young woman when the laws began, slowly and incompletely, to change. She had watched the world shift from the window of her mother's kitchen, and she had understood something that she could not fully have articulated, but that she lived by completely. That the measure of whether the change was real was not what the law said. It was what happened when a black woman walked up to the door and put her hand on the handle. She raised her daughter to walk up to the door. Vivian walked up to every door she could find. She was the kind of student that teachers remembered 20 years later. Not because she was the loudest in the room, but because she was the most present. The one who asked the question that reframed the entire discussion. The one who turned in papers that her teachers passed around the faculty lounge. The one who, at 17, sat in a law library in Montgomery and read international treaty documents for pleasure and understood them. She earned a scholarship to Georgetown University. She graduated summa cum laude. She went to Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship, one of the first black women from Alabama to do so, and she sat in tutorial rooms where the tradition was older than her country, and she was asked the hardest questions, and she answered them precisely and without apology. She earned her doctorate in international law. She joined the Harvard faculty at 31. She published 3 books on international relations that were used in graduate programs on 5 continents. She testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee 4 times. When the president called her into the Oval Office and asked her to represent the United States of America in the United Kingdom, the most consequential bilateral relationship in the world, the alliance that had shaped the modern international order, she sat across from him and said yes with the specific, unhurried certainty of someone who has been preparing for a question their whole life and is ready to give the answer. She had been ambassador for 18 months. She had been to the palace 3 times. She knew the protocol. She knew the entrance. She knew the guard rotation. She knew, in the way that black women in positions of power know things about the spaces they occupy, that knowing all of this still did not guarantee that every person at every gate would see what was in front of them. On a September evening, she put on her burgundy gown, the deep, rich burgundy that her mother had chosen when they went shopping for it in Washington 3 years ago, that Margaret Cole had held up and said, "This is the one that says everything," and her driver opened the door of the official embassy car. She stepped out. She walked toward the gate. She carried her credentials in her evening bag. She did not expect to need them. Corporal James Whitmore had been a royal guard for 12 years. He was 34 years old. He had served 2 tours with the household cavalry before joining the palace detail. He was, by the assessment of every superior officer who had evaluated him in 12 years of service, a dependable, conscientious, professional soldier. He took his role seriously. He believed in the institution he served. He stood at that gate with the posture of someone who understood that the uniform he wore and the palace he guarded represented something larger than himself. He was not a bad person. This is important to say, because the story of what happened on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace on a September evening is not a story about a monster. Monsters are easy. Monsters let us stand at a safe distance and say, "I would never." Monsters let us off the hook. Corporal Whitmore was not a monster. He was something more ordinary and therefore more dangerous. He was a person whose understanding of who belonged in certain spaces had been shaped by things he had never examined. Images accumulated over a lifetime, assumptions so familiar that they had become invisible, a picture in his mind of what importance looked like that had been built from sources he could not have named. The picture did not include a black woman arriving alone in a dark official car. He saw the car pull up. He saw the door open. He saw a woman in a burgundy evening gown step out, unaccompanied, no visible entourage, no male escort, no cluster of aides around her that his assumption associated with significance. He made a decision in the time it takes to take a breath. He had made variations of this decision before, in the accumulated small moments of a 12-year career, and it had never been tested because the people he made it about had always, eventually deferred, had stepped aside, had produced a card from a purse, or accepted the redirect to a side entrance with the quiet resignation of people who had been through this before and had learned that the energy of confronting it was often not worth what it cost. He stepped forward. The crowd behind the barriers was watching. The photographers were watching. The other arriving dignitaries, paused on the red carpet, or waiting at the gate, or watching from the palace steps, were watching. He did not check her credentials. He did not ask her name. He said in the clipped, authoritative tone of someone enforcing a policy he was certain applied, "This entrance is for invited guests and diplomatic personnel only. The staff entrance is on the side." The words landed on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace in front of the crowd and the cameras and the other dignitaries, and a September evening that had no interest in protecting anyone from the weight of what had just been said. Dr. Vivian Cole, United States Ambassador to the United Kingdom, representative of the most powerful nation on earth to the court of the British sovereign, holder of a doctorate from Oxford, former professor at Harvard, author of 3 books on international law, a woman who had been inside this palace 3 times in 18 months, had just been directed to the staff entrance. She stood very still. She had been doing this mathematics her entire life, the calculation of what a moment costs, what a response costs, what silence costs, what speaking costs. She had done it as a girl in Montgomery. She had done it at Oxford. She had done it in the Senate hearing room and the Oval Office and every other space that had not been built with her in mind. She was doing it now, on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace, in the burgundy gown, in front of everyone. She did not go to the staff entrance. She did not produce her credentials immediately, The way a woman who has been through this before and has internalized the requirement to prove herself at every door might produce them. Quickly, nervously, with the implicit apology of someone who is sorry for the inconvenience of existing in a space where her existence is questioned. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform outrage for the crowd or the cameras. She stepped aside, not away, aside, and she stood at the edge of the gate in her burgundy gown, and she looked at Corporal Whitmore with the expression of a woman who has been doing this calculation for 52 years and has arrived, in this specific moment, at a specific answer. She said, "I am Dr. Vivian Cole. I am the United States Ambassador to the United Kingdom. I am an invited guest of Her Majesty. I have been to this palace 3 times in the past 18 months. I will wait here while you verify that." She said it the way her mother had taught her to say the difficult thing. Not with anger, which can be dismissed. Not with tears, which can be managed. But with the flat, clear, precise delivery of someone stating facts that are not in dispute and would like them treated accordingly. Whitmore looked at her. He was recalibrating. She could see it, the slight adjustment in his posture, the pause that had not been in his procedure a moment ago. But he had committed to the position in front of a crowd, and the crowd was watching, and the thing about commitment is that it has its own momentum, and the momentum carried him forward. He said she would need to step aside, and he would need to verify her invitation. She said, "I will wait here." Not at the staff entrance. Here. Behind her, Robert Haynes, her deputy chief of mission, arriving in the car behind hers, had gotten out of his vehicle. He could see what was happening. He could see it clearly. He stood on the forecourt for 2 seconds. 3. 4. He would think about those 4 seconds for a long time afterward. He would think about them that night, lying awake in his residence in Mayfair. He would think about them the following week, when he sat across from her in the embassy on Grosvenor Square, and she looked at him with the expression of a woman who had noted something and filed it, and had not forgotten it and would not. He would think about them for years. The 4 seconds when he understood exactly what was happening and did not move toward it fast enough. The crowd was completely silent. The photographers had not stopped. The other dignitaries on the red carpet had paused in the particular, motionless way of people who understand that they are witnessing something that is being recorded by more than cameras, that it is being recorded in the memory of everyone present, that it will not be unseen. And at the top of the palace steps, a figure appeared, moving faster than his age usually allowed. Sir Edmund Ashby, senior palace protocol officer, had been watching from the entrance. There are moments in institutional life when a senior official understands, with cold and perfect clarity, the full dimensions of a catastrophe that is unfolding in front of them. Sir Edmund Ashby had served the crown for 31 years. He had managed state visits, diplomatic crises, protocol emergencies, the organized complexity of events at which the wrong word in the wrong order could unravel months of diplomatic preparation. He had seen things go wrong in the way that things go wrong at the highest levels, not with noise and drama, but with the quiet, irreversible precision of a small error in a critical system. What he saw from the top of the palace steps was not a small error. He saw the United States Ambassador to the United Kingdom standing at the gate of Buckingham Palace in her evening gown being directed to the staff entrance by a royal guard in front of a crowd of observers and a line of cameras. He was down the steps in 15 seconds. He covered the length of the red carpet with the particular urgency of a man who has spent 31 years managing the gap between what should happen and what is happening and has just encountered that gap at its widest. He reached Corporal Whitmore. He said something quietly. 2 sentences, precisely chosen, the volume of a man who understood that what he said next would either reduce or expand the damage, and who had made the calculation instantly. Whitmore's posture changed. It changed the way postures change when a person understands, all at once, the full weight of what they have done. Not the theoretical weight, not the abstract weight, but the specific, concrete, this is what I've actually done weight. His shoulders dropped a quarter of an inch. His chin came down. The certainty that had been in his bearing 30 seconds ago was gone. Ashby turned to face Vivian Cole. He looked at her for a moment, and what crossed his face in that moment was the specific expression of a man who has spent 31 years representing an institution he believes in and is standing in the gap between that institution's best version of itself and what has just happened at its gate. He said, and he said it at a volume that the crowd could hear, that the cameras could carry, that the dignitaries on the red carpet could hear, that the photographers could caption. He said, "Ambassador Cole, I am deeply and sincerely sorry. Please come with me. The words landed on the forecourt the way the correction of a public wrong lands when it is made publicly. Not erasing what happened, because nothing erases what happened, but standing beside it, and naming it, and refusing to let it be the final word. He offered his arm. Vivian Cole looked at him. She looked at him for a moment, not with coldness, not with performance. With the assessing, precise gaze of a woman who has spent 52 years reading rooms and the people in them, and who is reading this one now. The apology, the sincerity of it, or the absence of sincerity, the institution behind the man, the crowd around them, what accepting the arm meant, and what refusing it meant. She took his arm. She walked through the gate that had always been hers to walk through. The crowd, which had been holding its breath, released it. The cameras captured everything. And behind her, Corporal Whitmore stood at his post in the changed air of the forecourt and understood, perhaps for the first time in his 12 years of service, that the uniform he wore and the institution he served had a gap in them. A gap in the shape of an assumption he had never examined, and that gap had just been visible to everyone. The state banquet room is 170 covers of gold and crystal and flowers from the royal gardens, and it is, when you are inside it, both exactly what you expect and something more than that. It is more because of the weight of time in it. Because every person at this table is sitting in a room where decisions have been made for centuries, where alliances have been forged and broken, where the shape of the world has been discussed over meals that lasted 3 hours and changed the course of things. The room carries that history in its walls and its proportions and the specific quality of its light. Vivian Cole found her place card. She sat down. She unfolded her napkin with the practiced ease of a woman who has been to state banquets before and understands that the discipline of the occasion is not performed for anyone. It simply is, the way certain kinds of training become the body's default posture. The footman poured the first wine. The room filled with the organized hum of 170 conversations beginning. The chandeliers above cast their warm, democratic light across the table, across the heads of state and senior ministers and ambassadors, and the specific cross-section of people who hold, between them, the arrangements of the modern world. Vivian Cole was at the table. She was at the table because her president had put her here. Because 30 years of work had brought her here. Because her mother had told her, "You will go through every door." She thought about Margaret Cole. She thought about her mother in the mornings before work. The uniform laid out the night before, pressed, the shoes polished, the quiet preparation of someone who was going to do a job that the world undervalued, and do it with complete dignity, because dignity is not something that other people give you. It is something you carry. She thought about what her mother would say if she knew what had happened at the gate. She knew exactly what her mother would say. Her mother would say, of course that happened. Now tell me what you did next." She picked up her wine glass. At the far end of the table, partially visible through the formal arrangement of flowers and crystal, the Queen. Her Majesty had been told. In the quiet, precise way that a sovereign is told things at a state banquet. Not a scene, not a disruption, but a word from her private secretary during the reception. The information delivered with the economy of someone who understood that the Queen needed to know and needed to know quickly and needed only the essential facts. What was essential? The United States ambassador to the United Kingdom had been directed to the staff entrance by a royal guard at her own gate. In front of the cameras. In front of the crowd. In front of the diplomatic corps. The Queen had listened. She had asked one question. Then she went to dinner. And from her end of the table, across the 170 covers and the crystal and the gold plate and the flowers, she watched Dr. Vivian Cole sit down in the seat she had always been meant to occupy. Straight-backed, composed, the deep burgundy of her gown catching the chandelier light. And something moved across the Queen's face that was not quite a smile, and was not quite anger, and was something more considered than either. It was a decision. It had already been made. Vivian Cole did not know it yet. She was thinking about her mother. The banquet ended at 10:15. The formal conclusion, the toasts, the national anthems played by the orchestra in the gallery above, the specific ceremonial sequence that marks the close of a state banquet, proceeded with the precision of something rehearsed for 3 days and executed in an evening and made to look, as all such things are made to look, entirely effortless. The guests rose. The room reorganized itself into the gentle, diplomatic movement of 170 people concluding the evening. The conversations that needed to be had, the hands that needed to be shaken, the small strategic exchanges that were often, the real reason for the evening. Vivian Cole was speaking with the Foreign Secretary, a conversation about trade frameworks that had been pending for 2 months and that she intended to use this moment to advance, when a figure appeared at her elbow. The Queen's equerry. He was a man in his late 40s in full formal dress, with the specific, unhurried assurance of someone carrying a message he knows the recipient will want to receive. He waited for a natural pause in her conversation. He said quietly, "Ambassador Cole, Her Majesty would like to know if you would do her the honor of joining her in the state carriage for the ceremonial procession to the forecourt ceremony this evening." Vivian Cole looked at him. She understood what this was. She had been in enough rooms and at enough tables to understand the grammar of royal gestures. What a formal invitation meant, what a spontaneous one meant, what it meant when something that was not protocol was offered as if it were. She understood that this was not protocol. This was a decision. This was the Queen of the United Kingdom, who had been told what happened at her gate, who had sat at the other end of the table and watched a woman from Montgomery, Alabama, conduct herself with the complete and unwavering composure of someone who does not need the room's approval to know who she is, and who had decided that the evening was not finished. Vivian looked at the equerry. She said 4 words. "It would be my honor." He nodded. He led her through the palace, through the corridors of gold and portrait and history, through the specific, warm grandeur of a building that had been here for 3 centuries and had seen everything and was about to see one more thing, to where the carriage was waiting. The state carriage. Gold. Burgundy. The horses in full ceremonial dress. The coachman on the box. The footmen at the rear. The entire machinery of the royal ceremony was assembled and ready. And stepping up into the carriage already, with the practiced ease of someone who has done this 1,000 times. Her Majesty. She looked up as Vivian approached. She held out her hand. She said, "Ambassador Cole, thank you for joining me." Vivian took the offered hand. She stepped into the carriage. She sat beside the Queen of England. The doors closed. The horses moved. There is a particular quality to being inside a royal carriage that no photograph fully captures. It is the quality of being inside something that the world is watching from the outside. The sounds, the horses, the wheels on the stone, the crowd beyond the gate, arrive as if through water, slightly softened, slightly slowed. Inside the carriage there is a stillness. Outside it, the world presses against the glass. Vivian Cole sat beside the Queen of England, and she felt, with the complete physical specificity of her body in that seat, the full weight of the evening. Not the gate. Not Whitmore's certainty. Not the word staff entrance said in front of the crowd and the cameras and the other dignitaries. Those things were in the evening too. They were part of what made the weight of this moment exactly what it was. But what she felt was larger than that. She felt her mother. She felt Margaret Cole in the kitchen on Dexter Avenue in Montgomery, scrubbing the floor of the Alabama State Capitol building at 6 in the morning, 30 years ago, humming something low to herself in the empty corridor, doing the work the way she always did the work, with complete care and complete dignity and the absolute refusal to let the diminishment of the task diminish the person doing it. She felt the Rhodes Scholarship letter. The morning it arrived. Her mother at the kitchen table, reading it once and then again, and then placing it flat on the table with her hand over it the way you place your hand over something you do not want to lose. She felt Oxford, the tutorial room, the professor who had looked at her across his desk in the first week and asked her, with the precise, testing curiosity of a man who had interviewed Rhodes Scholars for 30 years and knew the difference between the ones who would survive and the ones who would not, what she believed about the relationship between power and law. And she had told him, at length, without apology. She felt the Oval Office, the president across the desk, the question offered, the yes she had given. She felt all of it in the 2 minutes and 40 seconds it took the carriage to cross the forecourt. Outside, the crowd. The same crowd that had been at the gate an hour ago. The tourists behind the barriers who had watched a black woman in a burgundy gown be directed to the staff entrance. The photographers who had documented it. The other dignitaries who had watched from the red carpet. They were all still there. The September evening still holding its last light, the palace lit from below, the barriers lined with people who had come to see the ceremony and had already seen something more than they expected. They heard the carriage before they saw it. The sound of the horses on the stone, the formal measured pace of the procession, and then the carriage appearing from the palace entrance, moving through the inner gate and onto the forecourt. And through the carriage window, visible to the crowd, visible to the cameras, visible to everyone who was watching. Two women sitting side by side. The Queen of the United Kingdom, and the woman who had been directed to the staff entrance. The crowd saw it. The cameras saw it. Every arriving dignitary, still on the forecourt, saw it. Robert Haynes, standing on the palace steps, saw it and felt the 4 seconds he had hesitated replay in his chest like a stone dropped in still water. Corporal Whitmore, back at his post at the gate, saw the carriage come through. He saw the woman in the burgundy gown. He saw where she was sitting. He stood very still. Inside the carriage, Vivian Cole was not watching Whitmore. She was watching the crowd. She was thinking about Margaret Cole cleaning floors in a building that would not let her through the front door. She was thinking about the question her mother had asked her every time she called home from a new room in a new building in a new city. Did you go through the front door? Yes, Mama. Did you hold it open behind you? Yes, Mama. The carriage moved through the gate. The crowd began to applaud. There are conversations that belong entirely to the people having them. What was said between the Queen of the United Kingdom and the United States ambassador to the court of St. James's in the gold and burgundy state carriage on that September evening has never been formally recorded. This is what is known. The carriage ride lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. At some point during those 4 minutes and 20 seconds, the Queen said something that made Vivian Cole look at her with an expression that the equerry, riding ahead on horseback, briefly turned back, described afterward as the expression of a woman receiving an acknowledgement she had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting. At some point during those 4 minutes and 20 seconds, Vivian Cole said something in return that made the Queen, who was not generally a person whose expressions changed dramatically in public settings, briefly close her eyes and nod in the specific way of someone hearing something that confirms something they already believed. What passed between them in the carriage was between them. What the carriage itself communicated to the crowd and the cameras and the watching world required no translation. A woman was directed to the staff entrance. The Queen put her in the state carriage. In 4 minutes and 20 seconds of gold and burgundy and horses on stone, an institution had said something about what it understood the evening to have been. Not with a press release, not with a formal statement, not with the measured language of diplomatic correction. With a carriage. With a seat. With 2 women side by side in front of the crowd. Some corrections are made in words. Some are made in gestures that the whole world can see. This was the second kind. By the time the London papers went to press, the photograph was already everywhere. Not the photograph of the gate. Not the photograph of Whitmore and the redirect to the staff entrance. Though that photograph existed and was circulating and would continue to circulate for a long time. The photograph that was everywhere was the carriage. The 2 women. The gold and the burgundy. The crowd visible at the edge of the frame. Their faces turned toward the carriage with the specific expression of people who understand that they are seeing something that means something. Not entirely sure what, but certain it matters. The headline in one paper was simply, "The Carriage." No explanation required. In Washington, at the State Department, the photograph was on the front page of the morning briefing, not because it was a diplomatic crisis, but because it was the opposite, a moment in which the relationship between 2 nations had been expressed not through a communiqué or a joint statement, but through the Queen of England placing a Black American woman beside her in the state carriage in front of the world. The President's Chief of Staff called the embassy. She said, "Tell Ambassador Cole the President saw the photograph." That was all. It was enough. In London, the Palace Press Office released a statement. It was 4 sentences long. It said that Corporal Whitmore had been spoken to. It said that the palace deeply regretted the incident at the gate. It said that Ambassador Cole had been the Queen's personal guest for the ceremonial procession. It said that the palace remained committed to ensuring that every guest was received with the full dignity their office and their person deserved. 4 sentences. The photograph said more than all 4 of them. Robert Haynes requested a meeting with Vivian Cole that morning. She gave him 20 minutes. She listened to what he had to say. She said 3 words in response, words that were not about forgiveness and not about condemnation, that were simply precise. "I need better." He left the meeting understanding exactly what that meant and what it would require of him. He did not hesitate again. Corporal Whitmore submitted a request, 3 days after the incident, to meet with the palace's diversity and inclusion officer. The meeting lasted 2 hours. What was said in it is not known. What is known is that he made the request himself, without being directed to, which is the specific difference between compliance and something more difficult and more necessary. The photograph ran in newspapers in 41 countries. In Nairobi, in Lagos, in Accra, in Kingston and Port-au-Prince, and 100 other cities where people saw a black woman in a gold carriage beside the Queen and felt something that they could not entirely have named, but that resided somewhere between recognition and hope. Vivian Cole gave no statement. She did not need to. The carriage had already spoken. In Montgomery, Alabama, the morning after the state banquet, Margaret Cole made herself a cup of tea. She made it the way she always made it, the kettle on the stove, not the electric one Vivian had bought her 3 Christmases ago, the one she used every day. The specific, lived-in ritual of a woman who has been making tea in this kitchen for 50 years and knows every second of the process without thinking. She sat down at the kitchen table. On the table in front of her, the newspaper. She had been out to get it at 6:30, the way she always got it at 6:30, putting on her coat and walking to the end of the block where the delivery was left and coming back with it folded under her arm. She unfolded it. The photograph was on the front page. Her daughter, in the gold and burgundy carriage, beside the Queen. Margaret Cole looked at the photograph for a long time without drinking her tea. She looked at the burgundy gown, the one she had chosen, the one she had held up in the store in Washington 3 years ago, and said, this is the one that says everything. She could see that she had been right. The gown was saying everything. She looked at her daughter's face. Vivian was not looking at the camera. She was looking forward, out through the carriage window at the crowd, at the forecourt, at the September evening. Her posture was the posture that Margaret Cole had watched develop across 52 years. From the little girl at the kitchen table with the library books, to the young woman reading treaty documents for pleasure, to the ambassador in the state carriage. The posture of someone who is exactly where they decided, a long time ago, they were going to be. Margaret Cole thought about the building on Dexter Avenue. She thought about the early mornings and the polished floors, and the front door she had entered through the side for 26 years, because that was the door she was given, and she had taken what she was given and done it with everything she had. She thought about the things she had told her daughter. Every door. Not the side door. Not the back door. Every door. She thought about the gate at Buckingham Palace. She had been told, Vivian had called her last night, late, from the embassy, and told her in the direct, complete way she told her everything, what had happened at the gate. The guard. The staff entrance. The crowd watching. Standing still and stating the facts. She had listened without interrupting, the way she always listened. When Vivian finished, she had said, and then Vivian had told her about Ashby coming down the steps, about the apology, about the equerry, about the carriage, and Margaret Cole had said nothing for a long moment. Then she had said, did you hold it open behind you? And her daughter had said, yes, Mama. And she had said, good, go to sleep. You have work tomorrow. Now she sat at the kitchen table in the morning light, the newspaper open in front of her, the tea going cold, and she looked at the photograph of her daughter in the gold and burgundy carriage beside the Queen of England. She did not cry. She was not, generally, a woman who cried at kitchen tables. She placed her hand flat on the photograph, over her daughter's face, the way she had placed her hand over the Rhodes Scholarship letter 30 years ago, the way you place your hand over something you do not want to lose. She said to no one in particular, to the kitchen, to the building on Dexter Avenue, to the front door she had used for 26 years that was not the front door. I told her every door. At 7:53 in the morning, Vivian Cole arrived at the United States Embassy on Grosvenor Square. She had slept 4 hours. She had run 3 miles along the embankment at 5:30 in the morning, the way she ran every morning that London allowed it. The river on her left, the city waking around her, the specific clarity of early morning that she had discovered at Georgetown and never given up. She had showered. She had eaten. She had spoken to her mother. She wore her work clothes, the dark jacket and trousers of a working ambassador, nothing ceremonial, nothing that announced itself. The burgundy gown was back in the wardrobe. She walked through the front entrance of the embassy. She said good morning to the security officer at the desk, a man named Thomas who had been at that desk for 11 years and who looked up and said good morning, Ambassador, and she said good morning, Thomas. And it was the exchange they had every morning, unremarkable, ordinary, the daily fabric of a working life. She took the elevator to the 3rd floor. She walked down the corridor to her office. She opened the door. She sat down at her desk. She opened her desk drawer and took out the photograph she kept there, old, slightly creased at the corners from being handled. Her mother, in her 30s, standing in front of the Alabama State Capitol building in her cleaning uniform. Chin level, eyes forward. The posture that Vivian Cole had been looking at her whole life and had, without being entirely aware of when it happened, made her own. She propped it against her desk lamp. She opened her briefing file. There was a trade framework meeting at 9. A call with Washington at 10:30. A working lunch with the Home Secretary at 12. A speech at the London School of Economics at 4. The day was full and consequential, and exactly what she had come here to do. She started work. She did not read the newspapers. She did not look at the photograph of the carriage that was on the front pages of 41 countries. She did not issue a statement. She did not perform, for anyone, the experience of having been humiliated at a gate and elevated in a carriage in the same evening. She worked, because the work had always been the point. The work was what she was here for. Everything else, the gate, the staff entrance, the crowd watching, the carriage, the Queen beside her, the photograph on the front pages, all of it was the noise that surrounded the point. She had learned, a long time ago, not to let the noise become the story. The story was the work. The work was the story. At 9:17, in the middle of the trade framework meeting, her phone lit up with a message from her mother. It said, "I am very proud of you. Now eat something." Vivian Cole looked at the message. She pressed the phone face down on the table. She went back to work. Outside the embassy windows, London was doing what London does, gray and purposeful and entirely indifferent to the fact that something significant had occurred the night before in a carriage on its forecourts. But here is the thing about significant moments. They do not require the city's acknowledgement. They do not require the newspapers or the photographs or the 41 countries or the calls from Washington. They require only the person who lived them, who stood at the gate and stated the facts and waited and walked through and sat in the carriage and held it together and then came back to work the next morning. They require only the person who carries them. And Dr. Vivian Cole, the daughter of Margaret Cole, the girl from Montgomery, the Rhodes Scholar, the Harvard professor, the United States ambassador to the United Kingdom, the woman in the burgundy gown, was carrying them. She had always carried them. She would carry them forward, through every door, and she would hold them open behind her.